At 6:42 p.m., Olivia Hart texted that she would be late. The message arrived while the rice cooker hissed and a skillet of shallots went from translucent to almost sweet. Daniel watched her bubble green speech balloon glide into place above the last, a tiny reassurance in the ritual of their days. "I'll be late, big rehearsal for tomorrow's pitch. Don't wait up if you're tired. Love you." He thumbed back a heart, then set the phone face down on the butcher block. He stirred the shallots and added a handful of peas with a snap that felt satisfying. In the window over the sink, the Williamsburg Bridge blazed against a mauve sky, the city in that brief hour where it pretended to be soft. When he bent to grab a baking sheet, the glint caught him. Something wedged where the cabinet met the baseboard, a dull, square wink. He nudged it free with a fingertip and felt metal, cool and familiar in weight. A cufflink, not his. Silver with a tiny onyx dot, understated in the way expensive things sometimes are. He turned it over and saw the engraving, MH. He stood too quickly. The kitchen tilted in the way it does when you stand from a long crouch and all the blood argues with gravity. He put the cufflink on the counter beside the soy sauce, and for a few seconds he stared at both as if they belonged to the same category of object. Then he picked up his phone. He didn't text. Instead, he opened their smart lock app and scrolled. Every entry was there. His comings and goings, Olivia's, the dog walker on Tuesdays at 2, the one-off code he generated last month for the plumber. Thursday, 1:18 p.m., unrecognized entry. The label read temp guest. He remembered that day as a non-day, a meeting that should have been an email, a gym session cut short by a sudden swarm of emails from a client who wanted more whimsy in the dashboard design. He closed the app and returned to the skillet. He folded in the rice, the scallions, the egg ribbons, and listened to the scrape of the wooden spoon along the pan, a sound like someone politely clearing their throat before saying something that cannot be unsaid. At 7:05 p.m., Olivia sent a photo, a lineup of shoes outside a conference room door, all pointed inward, as if the footwear were on tiptoe listening. Caption, "Late capitalism, darling." He smiled, because he could hear her saying it, hear the way she used humor to smooth the edges of pressure. He loved that about her. He loved, too, how she couldn't stand mediocrity, and therefore ran too fast and too hot, and forgot how to land. He poured himself sparkling water into a stemless wine glass because the glass made water feel like intention. He sat at the small table by the window and ate. Each bite tasted, but not tasted. He could have placed the cufflink in his palm and walked to the trash. He could have waited to ask. He could have told himself a story about coincidence, a vendor, a planner, a stylist, some harmless man with the wrong initials. But he knew Mark Hartley's initials, like he knew the weather. You pick them up when they orbit your life long enough, the tall copywriter with the bone-dry jokes, the face that photographed well at agency parties. "He's just a friend," Olivia had said once, not defensively or with a shrug, but like stating the weather. At 7:28 p.m., he sent his reply. "Take your time. Also ran into Mark in our hallway last Thursday. He left something behind." He watched the status change from delivered to read. Long moments passed while the city pressed its forehead against the glass. The 3 dots appeared, vanished, appeared again. He could hear the slick, bright hum of her office somewhere across the river, imagined her standing with her phone cupped in her hand, eyes widening not with guilt, no, with the recognition that a door had opened between 2 rooms of their life and the air was shifting. "Wait, what?" Her response finally arrived, a thin slice of tone flattened into text. He typed and erased twice. He put the phone down, then picked it up again. He went for plain. Found a cufflink under the cabinet. MH. Checked the lock logs. Temp guest code used Thursday at 1:18. This time the dots did not appear. He set the phone on the table and looked at the cufflink, certain now the object had weight beyond its grams. The dog, Max, laid his chin on Daniel's knee and sighed with the theatricality only dogs and children allow themselves. Daniel scratched behind a soft ear and felt, oddly, like he was rehearsing the motion of comfort he might not be able to offer later. Across the river, Olivia leaned her shoulder into a corridor painted designer gray and closed her eyes. She was not stupid, and she was not cruel, at least not on purpose. She had been moving too fast for too long, and in speed there is a mercy. You don't have to hear yourself think. The pitch was in 12 hours. The client had a logo that looked like a pill, and the personality to match, and the campaign needed saving. She'd scheduled her life in 30-minute increments for weeks, including showers and the exact minutes she'd allow herself to cry. The first time with Mark had not been planned. But then again, so many unplanned things wear the costume of the inevitable when you are starving for a witness. She typed, "Can we talk after I get home? I can leave in an hour." He stared at the message. He thought of the years they'd collected, the road trip across Utah with sunburnt noses, and a playlist they'd built together. The time her mother nearly died, and he slept in a hospital chair 4 nights because the nurses kept changing, and someone had to be constant. The plant that thrived only when she ignored it. The way she said his name when she was thinking, and how it felt like a question and an answer at once. "Of course," he wrote. "I'm here." He deleted the last period and sent it commaless, as if refusing the finality. He cleaned the kitchen with the attention of a man tucking a child into bed after a nightmare. He rinsed the pan, wiped the counter, put the cufflink into the small ceramic dish where they kept keys and coins and the tiny tolerances that kept a life from flying apart. He thought about anger and found that he could not pick it up yet. It was too heavy and too hot. What he could feel was the outline of anger, the way it would fit in his hands when finally he lifted it. For now, he chose order. A candle lit on the coffee table, 2 glasses set out, a throw straightened. When Olivia came through the door at 8:46 p.m., her face was already composed into the neutral grace professionals wear when moving from one stage to another. She took it off slowly, when she saw the house dressed for gentleness. She placed her bag on the bench and stood with her palms on the wood as if bracing herself for a wave. Max wagged and then, sensing the weather, retreated to his bed with a small, diplomatic grunt. "I got your messages," she said, which was unnecessary and therefore honest. Daniel nodded. "I figured." She saw the cufflink in the dish, sharp as a note held too long. Something inside her went quiet in that particular way that happens when your body understands before your mind does that a life is about to change. "Tea?" he asked. She laughed once, a sound like a splinter. "Sure." He moved toward the kettle, and she toward the couch. 2 people who had learned choreography well enough to dance without touching. The kettle sang and he poured. The city buzzed and calmed, traffic shushing the block like an overworked librarian. He passed her the mug and sat across from her, not beside. It was a kindness and a line. "I need the truth," he said. Not a question, not an accusation, a request dressed as a sentence. Olivia wrapped both hands around the heat. She looked at him the way you look at a photograph of yourself taken just before you knew who you would become. The words formed, then broke. She reached for her phone and put it face down, a gesture of surrender. "Before I answer," she said softly, "tell me what you already know." He glanced at the dish, at the small black dot in the silver. "Enough to stop pretending," he said. "Not enough to stop loving you." Something like grief passed over her face, and something like hope took its shadow. Outside, an ambulance howled and was gone. Inside, 2 mugs steamed, and the night pressed closer, patient. "Then I'll start there," she whispered, "with not pretending." And the room finally stilled. The kettle quieted, but the sound seemed to go on inside their ribs. Olivia held the mug as if its heat could solder the space that had opened between them. Daniel rested his elbows on his thighs, hands laced, the way he did when calibrating a problem at work. No panic, only the slow turning of a dial. "I met Mark 3 years ago," she said at last, and watched the words land between them like careful packages. "Late nights at the agency become their own country. You forget the time zones other people live in." Daniel nodded once. He did not ask the easy question, "Did you love him?" because it would deliver too neat an answer. Instead, "What did you find there that you couldn't find here?" She swallowed. "A mirror I didn't have to polish. The version of me that always has a solution, that knows which room to walk into and what to say. With you, I don't want to be that person all the time. With him, I didn't have to admit I was tired." Max shifted on his bed with a dog's theatrical sigh, then resettled, his collar clinking. Outside, someone laughed too loudly on the sidewalk. The joy of young people traveling in a pack. Daniel looked at the dish again, the cufflink like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence he didn't remember writing. "Thursday?" he asked, "when the temp code was used." Olivia nodded. The motion was tiny, the kind you'd miss if you weren't looking directly at it. "He came by to drop off a hard drive. That's not a euphemism. We had an edit crisis. He shouldn't have stayed." And yet, she repeated, the phrase a plank they both stood on. She took a breath, then another, the disciplined cadence of someone about to make a presentation under bad lighting. "It's not just about him. It's the pace. The way New York makes time into a commodity you can trade for admiration." I kept telling myself that the marriage would understand, that you would. "I tried to," he said. The words were gentle and also true. He thought of the nights alone with the television's low flicker, of his work Slack chirping with asynchronous emergencies, of the way he made dinner even when he wasn't hungry because it made a shape to the evening. He thought of his mother's recent text, "How are you two?" to which he'd replied with a photo of the dog in a sweater, a joke standing in for an answer. He got up and retrieved a printed page from the console table. "I wrote you something, Vid," he said, and the humility in his voice surprised even him. "A letter, not, I don't know, not a demand, a map, maybe." She took it with hands that were steady in public and private storms alike. The letter was 1 page, typed, his name and the date at the top, the kind of domestic formality that felt like a will. "Olivia, there are facts I cannot unknow now. I don't want to interrogate you, and I don't want to pretend. If we go forward, I need to know we are talking about the same marriage. Mine has had too much silence in it. I contributed to that silence by being grateful instead of honest, by choosing competence over vulnerability. I'm asking for a version where we make room for the parts that are not polished. If you don't want that with me, tell me. I will survive the truth better than its absence." D. She ran her thumb along the edge of the page. The clock on the microwave ticked to 8:59 and then to 9:00 with a soft electrical stutter. "You will survive the truth better than its absence," she repeated, as if trying on the size of the sentence. "I think so," he said. "I think we both will." Silence drew up a chair. In it was all the ways this could go: slam, storm, denial, negotiation, the ceremonial burn of a single object. Olivia closed her eyes and saw instead a smaller room, their first apartment with the slanted floors and the window AC unit that rattled like cutlery in a drawer. The mattress on the floor, the white string lights that pretended to be a plan, The summer they could only afford farmers market seconds and made soups that stained everything orange. In that room, they had not been better people. They had simply been closer to the ground. "I don't know how to unspool this neatly," she said, eyes still closed. "But I can tell you I was lonelier than I knew. And then I wasn't. And that felt like oxygen. After, it felt like theft." He flinched. Not at the confession, but at the word after. The grammar of betrayal included a before and an after, and he was now a citizen of both. "When did it start?" he asked, and the question was less a timestamp than a request for coordinates on a map so he could place himself. "February," she said. "Late. We had the pharma account, the one with the humorless legal team. Everyone was going feral. I told myself it was stress. Then I told myself it was a one-time collapse. Then I stopped telling myself anything." "What do you want now?" he asked. She looked up. "Right now? To sleep for 10 hours and wake up in a world where I didn't hurt you." He acknowledged the wish with a flicker of a smile that wasn't really a smile. "And later?" "Later," she said, and the word was a room with the lights off. "I want to work for it, if there is a for it." He sat back. Relief did not flood him. Nothing flooded him. What happened instead was a thinning, a lightness that wasn't joy, a door opening in a stuffy room. The future had not been fixed to one image. There were multiple pictures now, some painful, some plausible. "Tomorrow is your pitch," he said. "You should sleep. We should both sleep." She laughed, small, dry. "I'll be rehearsing lines about authenticity and brand courage for a client whose logo is a pill." "Then be authentic," he said, and meant the joke kindly. "Be courageous." "You stayed kind," she murmured, as if noting a phenomenon in a lab. "Even now." He didn't know whether that was a compliment or a failure. They stood, and the choreography failed them for a second. Did they hug? Did they nod? Did they shake hands like colleagues after a difficult meeting? He stepped aside and she brushed past. The scent of her, a citrus top note over something warmer, rising like a memory with instructions. In the bedroom, Olivia sat at the edge of the bed and opened her laptop. The pitch deck bloomed into color, laughing faces, street scenes, the agency's careful copy about ambition having a heart. She scrolled through the slides, and then to a blank page in her notes app and wrote, not for the client, but for herself. "I crossed a line because I was tired of earning love only by performing. I want home to be the place where excellence is optional and presence is enough. Start telling the truth out loud." She set the laptop aside and looked at the two pillows aligned like a pair of equal signs. She lay down on top of the duvet, shoes still on, and stared at the ceiling. The apartment was quiet, in that expensive way city quiet can be, noise professionally softened. Through the wall, the faintest pulse of someone's music bass like a heartbeat reminded her that life went on, even when you wanted it to pause long enough for you to catch it. Daniel, in the living room, opened the smart lock app again and then closed it, ashamed of the habit already forming around surveillance. He opened a new tab and searched for couples counseling near Williamsburg. The names resolved into directories and bios, trauma-informed, Gottman certified, sliding scale available. He bookmarked 3, and then, in another act of not pretending, texted his sister in Massachusetts. "Complicated night. We're okay. Not okay. Okay, but talking." She wrote back quickly. "Love you. Here when you want to call. No judgment, just ears." He breathed and realized how long he'd been holding the inhale. He turned off the lamp and let the room be a little dimmer than comfortable. From the bedroom came the small sound of a zipper, a sigh, the weight of something set aside. He remembered the first time they'd shared a closet, how she laughed at his neat rows of shirts, how he loved her cheerful chaos of scarves and color. How, over the years, Their styles had converged into a détente, his stacks a little messier, hers a little tidier. What did compromise mean, if not this, the slow blending of habits into a shared grammar? He texted one last line, to no one, in a notes file he kept like a shoreline. I will not confuse serenity with suppression. I will not punish to feel strong. In the bedroom doorway, Olivia appeared, a shadow, then a woman standing in the low spill of light. "Can I sit?" she asked, and he gestured to the chair opposite, the one that had become, in the last hour, the site of formal conversation. "No," he said, and she looked startled until he added, "Sit here." He patted the couch beside him. She did slowly, and they did not touch. The space between their shoulders was honest. The dog, reading the room with his simple theology, climbed up and planted himself across both of their feet, a small bridge with fur. "We'll talk more after tomorrow," Daniel said. She nodded. "After tomorrow," she echoed, and the phrase, for once, sounded like a promise neither of them owed to anyone else. The city slipped further into night. Somewhere, a siren curled and uncurled. In the quiet after, they sat with their tea, with their letter, with the artifact in a dish that had redefined their evening. The cracks were there, hairline and also structural. But there they were, looking not away, not through, but at. "Try to sleep," he said. "You too," she answered. They didn't. Not really, but they lay down in the same dark, and that was, for now, a kind of beginning. The morning arrived thin and gray, New York wrapped in a film of humidity that turned every window pane into a half-remembered photograph. Olivia woke first. She hadn't slept so much as drifted her body, refusing the luxury of rest. The air between her and Daniel was heavy but calm, like the silence after a verdict that both already knew. She moved quietly through the apartment, gathering her things. The navy dress she always wore for client presentations. The silver necklace her mother had given her when she got her first creative director role. Her phone blinking with calendar reminders. She avoided the ceramic dish by the door, the one holding the cufflink, its gleam like a moral she hadn't finished reading. In the kitchen, she brewed coffee. Daniel's mug sat beside hers out of habit, though he was still asleep. For a second, she allowed herself the dangerous thought that maybe, somehow, this day could still go on as before, that the city would demand performance, and she would comply, because pretending had always been her most refined skill. But even the coffee smelled different now, sharp as confession. By the time she slipped out the door, Daniel was awake, listening to the sound of the elevator descending. He stared at the faint indentation her pillow had left on the duvet. Then he reached for his laptop, the one she'd given him years ago when he switched jobs. The wallpaper, a photo of them hiking in Vermont, looked like strangers posing in borrowed sunlight. He didn't open work. He opened notes again, scrolling through old fragments, grocery lists, half-finished thoughts, one titled "Vows I Didn't Say." In it, his younger self had written, "I'll never let ambition make us temporary." He closed it. He didn't delete it. He showered, dressed, and took Max out. The city was still shaking off its early stupor. Baristas moved like choreography behind steamed glass. Outside the coffee shop near the East River, Daniel paused, phone in hand. He typed a message to Olivia. "Good luck today," then erased it. He wanted the words to matter, not perform. So he sent instead, "Be real. You're better when you are." Olivia's office on Madison buzzed with a kind of false urgency, particular to agencies on pitch day. The conference room was already alive when she arrived, screens flickering, assistants running cables, the smell of perfume and burnt espresso fighting for dominance. Mark was there, of course, leaning against the whiteboard, sleeves rolled, charm calibrated. He turned as she entered. "Did you get any sleep?" "A few hours." He studied her, his expression a mix of concern and something unspoken. "You okay?" She almost laughed at the question. Okay was a word people used to mean, can you still function? "I'm fine," she said instead, professional. "Cool." But her voice carried a tremor that wasn't caffeine. Mark noticed. His gaze softened in a way that used to feel like comfort and now only felt invasive. She stepped past him, focusing on the slides. "Let's keep the pitch clean," she said. "No over-talking. Let them feel the silence it sells confidence." He nodded, but the silence that followed wasn't confidence. It was the ghost of what they'd shared. When the clients arrived, a sea of neutral tones and self-importance, Olivia became the woman she had built. Articulate, composed, impossible to fluster. She guided them through the deck, each transition precise, her words tightrope walking between passion and control. Applause followed. The client smiled that corporate smile that meant victory was probable. But as the room emptied, Mark lingered. "You killed it," he said. "Thanks." She didn't look at him. He hesitated. "About Thursday." She turned sharply, eyes colder than she intended. "Don't. Not here. Not anywhere." He froze. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," she cut in, quieter now. "But whatever this was, it ends here." Mark's face flickered between hurt and disbelief. "Because he found out?" "No," she said, and the truth landed even heavier than the accusation. "Because I found out about myself." She walked out before he could reply. Back in Brooklyn, the afternoon dragged. Daniel worked remotely, but absorbed nothing. The cursor blinked at him like an impatient heartbeat. He called up one of the therapists he'd bookmarked, Dr. Ellen Sykes, and left a message that was almost apologetic. "My wife and I are going through something. We'd like to talk. Soon, if possible." When he hung up, he noticed the photo frames along the wall. One had slipped sideways, their wedding in upstate New York, both grinning under a canopy of lights. He straightened it, then realized the gesture was absurd, trying to balance glass while everything else tilted. His phone buzzed. "Olivia, the pitch went well, heading home soon." He typed back, "Good. I made dinner again. It's edible, I think." A pause. Then her reply. "That sounds nice." He stared at the screen a long time. Nice. The word that lives between effort and indifference. She arrived before sunset, the air outside metallic with the smell of summer rain. Daniel was chopping cilantro when she entered, hair still pinned, shoulders sagging. "How'd it go?" he asked without turning. "They want us to refine the budget, but it's a yes in spirit." "That's good." "It's something." He plated the food tacos, simple, and poured 2 glasses of lime water. They sat opposite each other, the distance between plates measurable in inches but galaxies deep. Finally she spoke. "I ended it with Mark." He looked up. "Today?" "Yes, at the office." He nodded once. "Thank you." "I didn't do it for you," she said softly. "I did it because I realized I can't talk about integrity in boardrooms and live a lie at home." "That's for both of us, then." They ate quietly. The city outside dimmed into its usual electric pulse. When the dishes were done, Daniel leaned against the counter, hands gripping the edge. "I called someone," he said. "A therapist." Olivia's breath caught. "You did?" "I think we need a witness, someone who can translate when words stop working." She nodded, relief and fear tangled in the motion. "Okay, I'll go." He looked at her, truly looked, and saw the exhaustion under her makeup, the thin line of red where tears had once been pressed back. "Thank you," he said. Olivia exhaled. "I'm scared, Daniel." "So am I," he admitted. "But that's the first honest thing we've shared in months." For a long time, they just stood there, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Then, quietly, she reached for his hand, not as an apology, not as a claim, but as an acknowledgement that something fragile still lived between them. He didn't pull away. Later, when she showered, he stood in the living room staring out at the bridge. The water ran behind him, steady as time. He thought about all the ways love decays not through betrayal alone, but through the erosion of small attentions, the forgetting to look, the surrender to fatigue. He whispered, "We can start over," though he wasn't sure if he believed it yet. And in the steam-filled bathroom, Olivia closed her eyes under the spray and whispered back, unheard, "If you'll have me." Sunday arrived quiet, washed pale after a night of rain. The city was still damp, air smelling faintly of asphalt and coffee grounds. Daniel stood by the window in his sweats, watching a cyclist glide through puddles, their reflection doubling the motion. Behind him, Olivia moved through the kitchen barefoot, hair still damp, humming under her breath. It could have been any Sunday, except for the weight of what they both now knew. The weekend light softened everything, but not enough to hide the tension that hung like humidity. They had agreed, without saying it aloud, to avoid talk of Mark, of Thursday, of the cufflinks still lying in the dish. Instead, they tried to occupy normalcy like actors improvising a familiar scene. She brewed coffee. He sliced fruit. Max paced between them, expectant for crumbs of peace. "You booked the therapist?" Olivia asked finally. "Tomorrow evening, 7 p.m., so," Daniel said. "Dr. Sykes. She seemed calm, at least on the phone." "That's good." Olivia's tone was neutral, but her fingers trembled slightly as she stirred her cup. "I don't even know what I'll say." "You'll say the truth," he said gently. "Whatever that looks like when it comes out." She nodded. Truth. A word she used to love, in campaigns and taglines and keynotes. But now it felt less like light and more like acid it cleansed by burning. At noon, they drove to his parents' place in Connecticut for Sunday lunch. It had been planned weeks ago. Neither wanted to cancel. The car ride was mostly silence, save for the faint playlist she'd put on Bon Iver, then Norah Jones, then something instrumental that felt like breathing space. When they reached the house, Daniel's mother greeted them with her usual brightness. "You two look tired," she said, and kissed Olivia's cheek. "Big projects, huh?" Olivia smiled. "Something like that." His mother's garden was in bloom dahlias, lavender, and a dozen meticulous tomato plants his father pretended not to obsess over. They sat under the pergola for lunch, sunlight breaking through like polite applause. For a while, conversation held steady. Work updates, Max's new habit of stealing socks, the small rituals that keep families orbiting each other. But midway through dessert, Daniel's younger sister Rachel, sharp-eyed and blunt, tilted her head. "You guys okay?" The question landed like a pebble in still water. Olivia froze. Daniel forced a smile. "We're working through things." Rachel's eyes softened. "Good. Everyone should. The rest of us just pretend." Something in Olivia cracked. The words hit too close, too true. She excused herself and wandered to the far end of the garden, pretending to admire the tomatoes. Daniel followed after a moment, hands in pockets. "You don't have to stay long," he murmured. "I know." She looked at the horizon, at the tidy line where green met gray sky. "It's just strange, isn't it? Being here, smiling, knowing everything's unraveling." "Maybe this is what holding on looks like, he said. She turned to him then, eyes glinting with exhaustion. "Do you ever wonder if we're holding on to love, or just the idea of being the kind of people who don't give up?" He didn't answer right away. The wind moved through the lavender. Somewhere, His mother laughed at something Rachel said. Both, he finally replied, but maybe that's enough for now. They left before sunset. The drive back was heavier. Olivia leaned her forehead against the glass, watching the world smear into streaks of gold and gray. At a red light, Daniel said, "You remember the first time you came here?" She smiled faintly. "Your mom made lasagna, and your dad grilled even though it was snowing. I thought, this family is insane. And now I think maybe insanity was the point. They cared enough to try too hard." Daniel's fingers tapped the steering wheel. "Maybe we stopped trying too hard." Her gaze lingered on his reflection in the window. "Maybe we got scared of failing at it." That night, after Max had curled up by their bed, Olivia sat cross-legged on the rug, scrolling. Through old photos, trips, dinners, blurry selfies, where love was obvious in the way they leaned into each other. She lingered on one from Vermont, Daniel laughing mid-sentence, snow caught in his hair, her own face half hidden but radiant. She whispered, "I miss that version of us." Daniel, reading nearby, heard her. He set his book down. "I don't. I miss how easy it was. But that version of us didn't know how to talk about pain. Maybe this one will." She looked at him, then really looked, and something in her chest shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always." "When you found the cufflink, what did you feel first?" He thought about it, eyes tracing the ceiling. Not anger, not even betrayal, just confusion, like someone switched the map while I was still walking. Her eyes welled. "I'm sorry I made you lost." "And I'm sorry I didn't notice you were fading," he said. "I kept thinking being steady was the same as being present." They sat in that confession, the air finally moving again. She reached out, brushing the back of his hand with her fingertips. He didn't pull away this time. "I want to go tomorrow," she said quietly. "To therapy. To talk. I know. Not just about what I did, but why." He met her gaze. "That's where healing starts." Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere far off, the kind of storm that takes hours to arrive. Inside, the quiet had changed shape. It no longer pressed down. It breathed. In bed later, neither could sleep. Olivia stared at the ceiling fan's slow rotation. Daniel listened to the city hum through the windows. "Tomorrow," she whispered into the dark. "Tomorrow," he echoed, and for the first time in months, the word didn't sound like a delay. It sounded like a promise with no script yet written. Monday stretched itself thin over the city. The morning light filtered through gray clouds, the kind that made Brooklyn feel like an old photograph left too long in the rain. Daniel woke early, though he'd barely slept. The appointment with Dr. Sykes was marked on his phone calendar, 7 o'clock p.m., couples session number 1, and it glared at him like an overdue bill. He brewed coffee while Olivia dressed for work. They moved in near silence, the kind of silence that isn't hostile, but fragile, like glass placed carefully between two hands. Max padded in, tail wagging softly, sensing the change in weather, emotional or otherwise. "You didn't have to make coffee," she said, fastening her earring in the mirror. "I did," he replied. "It's something I still know how to do right." That small attempt at normalcy almost undid her. She took the mug from him, her fingers brushing his, a contact brief and electric. "Thank you," she murmured. They didn't kiss goodbye. They hadn't, in weeks. But when she left, Daniel stood in the doorway longer than usual, watching her. Walked down the hall, heels clicking like a metronome, counting the distance between then and now. At the agency, Olivia threw herself into work. Her team had won the account, and the partners were ecstatic. Emails flooded her inbox. "Brilliant delivery, Olivia." The clients obsessed. Compliments she used to savor now felt hollow, like echoes in a room where the music had stopped. Mark avoided her all morning. She noticed, of course, how his chair remained empty during brainstorms, how his laughter faded from nearby desks. By noon, he appeared at her office door, hands in his pockets, eyes uncertain. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. She gestured to the glass walls around her. "Not here." They took the elevator down to the street. The city air smelled like wet concrete and burnt espresso. They stood by the curb as taxis streamed past. "I wanted to apologize," Mark began. "Not for what happened, well, yes, that too, but for not seeing what it was doing to you." Olivia exhaled. "You didn't make me do anything, Mark. I was a willing participant in my own disaster." He looked at her, guilt and something like longing crossing his face. "He knows, doesn't he?" "Yes." "And?" "We're talking." Mark nodded, shoulders slumping slightly. "I hope you can fix it. You deserve that." She stared at him for a moment, this man who had once felt like a refuge and now looked like a closed chapter. "We both deserve to stop breaking things that still have a chance," she said. Then she walked away before he could answer. Back in her office, she opened her email, but her eyes caught on something in the corner of her desk. The old paper planner Daniel had bought her years ago, before she migrated everything to digital. It was leather, scratched, and still smelled faintly of cedar. She flipped it open and found notes from 2019 scribbles about their trip to Portland. A grocery list that read avocados, candle, his favorite tea. Her throat tightened. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped writing anything by hand, stopped recording the small things that made life bearable. She took out her pen and wrote on the next blank page, "Tonight, tell the truth, even if it burns." Daniel's day was no easier. His inbox overflowed, but his mind kept circling the same few frames of memory, the cufflink, her face when she saw it, the tremor in her voice last night when she'd said, "I'm scared." He told himself fear was good. Fear meant they still cared what came next. At lunch, he met his friend and coworker Ben at a cafe near Dumbo. Ben was the kind of man who noticed things and rarely said them unless necessary. "You look like someone who's been living on black coffee and anxiety," Ben remarked. "Accurate," Daniel said. Ben leaned back. "You and Liv, okay?" Daniel hesitated. "We're in the middle of a reckoning." "Ah," Ben said softly. "The grown-up kind of heartbreak." Daniel smiled ruefully. "Something like that." Ben nodded. "You're doing the right thing, though. Most people just pretend until the pretending becomes easier than the truth." Daniel stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking softly. "Pretending was easy. I think that's what scares me the most." Evening came slow. By 6:30, Olivia was already waiting outside Dr. Sykes' office, a brownstone on a quiet street in Carroll Gardens. The air smelled faintly of rain and jasmine from a nearby window box. Daniel arrived moments later, tie loosened, eyes tired but alert. They exchanged a small, uncertain smile. No hug, no words. Inside, Dr. Ellen Sykes greeted them with the calm precision of someone who'd spent decades decoding the language of silence. Her office was warm, lined with books and soft light. She gestured to the couch. "Sit anywhere that feels comfortable," she said. They sat together, though a careful inch of air separated them. Ellen smiled gently. "You've both been through a lot, I imagine." Neither spoke. Daniel finally said, "We're still deciding what through means." Ellen nodded. "That's honest. Honesty is a good place to start." She glanced between them. "Why don't you tell me what brought you here?" Olivia inhaled, slow and deliberate. "Because I crossed a line, and because I don't know how to uncross it." Ellen turned to Daniel. "And you?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Because I don't know how to love her without losing myself." The room went still. Ellen nodded once, as if acknowledging the courage in both sentences. Then tonight, let's start by naming what's left, what you still value, even now. Silence. Then Olivia whispered, his steadiness. Daniel looked at her, startled. She continued, he's the only person I've ever known who doesn't use love as a weapon. Ellen's gaze softened. And you, Daniel? He swallowed. Her fire, even when it burns me. She believes in things so fiercely it's impossible not to get pulled in. Ellen smiled faintly. That's a start. Broken doesn't mean empty. They spent the next hour talking in fits and starts about ambition, exhaustion, loneliness disguised as independence. Ellen asked them to write down one thing they wanted from each other that didn't involve fixing, only seeing. Daniel wrote, I want you to be real, not perfect. Olivia wrote, I want you to let me fall apart without assuming it's your fault. They exchanged papers, read, breathed. Ellen said, these are the first receipts of accountability. Keep them. When they left, the sky had cleared. The city lights shimmered in puddles, doubling everything. At the curb, Olivia turned to him. Do you hate me? He shook his head. No, hate is simple. This isn't. She nodded. I don't deserve your grace. Maybe not, he said softly. But maybe we both deserve a chance to learn what forgiveness actually looks like. They stood there, a moment longer, the night hum around them like a heartbeat, before walking side by side toward the train, not touching, not speaking, but tethered again, however tenuously, by the choice to stay in the conversation. The next few days moved with the precision of routine emails, deadlines, grocery runs, but underneath, the silence between them changed texture. It was no longer avoidance, it was a kind of truce. Olivia and Daniel existed like two actors rehearsing a fragile play, every line measured, every gesture softened to keep from shattering what they'd barely begun to rebuild. It was Thursday evening when the quiet finally broke. The sky had the color of steel, rain threatening but not yet arriving. Daniel was cooking again, salmon, asparagus, lemon zest, his therapy homework and practice. Create safe rituals, even in uncertainty. Olivia sat at the counter with her laptop open but untouched, staring at a blank document. She'd been tasked by Dr. Sykes to write a truth letter she might never send. A letter that told him what her affair was really about, not Mark, but the emptiness that preceded him. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, but words refused to land. Instead, she closed the laptop and whispered, I can't do this. Daniel looked up from the stove. Do what? This, she said, her voice cracking. The pretending that this is normal, that therapy's fixing something when I don't even know what we're trying to save. He turned off the burner. The sizzle died. The silence grew. Then tell me, he said quietly, what do you need from me that you haven't said? She hesitated, eyes glassy. I need you to stop being perfect. He blinked. Perfect? You're kind, patient, rational, always rational. You never yell. You never lose control. Even now, you're just managing. And it makes me feel like a monster. He leaned against the counter, arms folded. Would it be easier if I screamed at you? I don't know, she said. Maybe it would remind me you still feel something. His jaw tightened. I feel plenty, Liv. You just don't always want to see it. Then show me. The air cracked between them, a quiet violence born of exhaustion. Daniel's voice came lower, rougher. You want to see it? Fine. I'm angry. I'm angry that you chose to trust someone else with the parts of you I've spent years trying to reach. I'm angry that I let work and comfort become excuses, and I'm angry that even now, I still want you. She flinched at the last sentence, not from the anger, but the truth in it. He took a step closer, his voice trembling now. You think I'm calm because I don't care? I'm calm because if I stop holding it together, everything we built will collapse, and I don't know who I'll be without that. Olivia's breath hitched. She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. Her eyes filled, then overflowed. Daniel turned away, pressing his palms against the counter, as though grounding himself. This is what Dr. Sykes meant, he said hoarsely. The crash of silence, when everything unsaid finally hits the floor. She moved toward him, slowly, cautiously, as if approaching a wounded animal. Her hand hovered near his shoulder, unsure whether she still had the right to touch him. I never wanted to destroy you, she whispered. I just wanted to feel alive again, he finished for her. She nodded. He turned then, meeting her gaze. The exhaustion in her face mirrored his own, the kind of fatigue that comes from carrying too much truth. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, breathing the same uncertain air. Then, wordlessly, she reached into her bag and pulled out the letter she hadn't finished. She unfolded it, hands shaking. It's not done, she said, but you should read what there is. He hesitated, then took it. The paper was crumpled, ink smudged where tears had fallen. Daniel, I used to think our love was safety, but maybe I needed it to be permission. Permission to be imperfect, impulsive, human. I didn't want someone better than me. I wanted someone who'd admit they didn't know how to be good all the time either. Mark wasn't a replacement. He was a mirror of my loneliness. But even when I was with him, I missed you. Not the you in photos, or the one at dinner parties, the one who hums when he codes, who talks to the dog like he's a person, who reads the news aloud just to hear if the words still sound sane. I broke something sacred. I know that. But I need you to know it wasn't boredom or cruelty. It was hunger for presence, for connection, for the kind of honesty I was too afraid to demand from you. Daniel read it twice, the words slicing quietly through his composure. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red but dry. Thank you for writing this, he said. I didn't write it for forgiveness, she whispered. I wrote it because lies rot the air between people. He nodded. Then let's stop breathing lies. The rain finally began, outside, soft at first, then relentless, drumming against the glass. Olivia moved closer, until the space between them was almost gone. She leaned her forehead against his chest. The first contact in what felt like centuries. Daniel stood still, uncertain, then let his hand rest gently on the back of her head. Neither spoke. The only sound was the rain, the city's dull heartbeat, and two people rediscovering how to stand together in the wreckage of truth. When she finally pulled back, he touched her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. You're right, he said. I've been trying so hard to be unbreakable that I forgot love isn't built on control. And I, she replied, voice trembling, confused being seen with being saved. The storm outside raged harder, wind pressing against the windows, as though to remind them how small they were. Come here, he said softly. She hesitated. Daniel, not to forget, he interrupted, just to remember we're still here. And she went to him. They stood in the dim light, arms tangled, grief and relief colliding until neither could tell them apart. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet it was survival. The crash had happened. The silence had split open. And in its wake was something raw, unfinished, but alive. When the lights flickered from the storm, Olivia whispered, What now? Daniel's voice was barely audible. Now we see what's left when the noise fades. Outside, thunder rolled, then retreated. Inside, two hearts kept time with the rain. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving behind a city rinsed clean but fragile, as if one strong breath could fog the whole skyline again. Daniel stood by the window, mug in hand, looking down at the street below where delivery vans hissed through shallow puddles. Olivia was still asleep on the couch, her body curled beneath the throw blanket, her breathing steady and small. She hadn't meant to fall asleep there. She'd sat up talking with him until almost 2 a.m., conversation tapering off into the kind of silence that wasn't avoidance anymore, but exhaustion shared. He watched her for a while, the light sliding across her face, softening the hard edges the past weeks had carved. There was something startling in her stillness. For months he had known only the restless Olivia, her constant scrolling, her tapping foot, her eyes flicking between screens. But here she looked young again, human in a way he'd almost forgotten. When she woke, it was to the smell of coffee and the sound of rainwater dripping from the gutters. She blinked, disoriented, then saw Daniel in the kitchen. "You're up early," she murmured. "Didn't sleep much." "Me neither." He poured her a mug and handed it over. Their fingers brushed. Neither flinched this time. "Dr. Sykes said to give things names," Olivia said after a while. "To stop speaking in metaphors and actually say what's happening. So, I've been thinking." Daniel leaned against the counter, waiting. "I think we need space," she said carefully. "Not as an escape, as air." He froze for a moment, trying to measure the shape of that word. "Space as in apart?" "As in separate rooms for a while," she clarified, "so we can breathe without pretending everything's fixed." He looked down at his hands, the knuckles whitening around the ceramic. "You really think that helps?" "I think staying fused while we're bleeding doesn't," she said softly. "Every conversation turns into triage. We need to remember who we are when we're not managing each other's pain." The clock ticked once, twice, then he nodded. "Okay, but promise me something space doesn't mean silence again." "It won't," she said. "I'm done with silence." 2 days later, Olivia moved into the spare bedroom. The act was quiet, domestic almost, her clothes folded neatly, laptop on the small desk, the soft lamplight that made the room hers without making it foreign. It wasn't exile, it was an agreement. They set ground rules: shared meals 3 times a week, therapy every Monday, no late-night arguments. They would speak honestly, even if it hurt, and they would not weaponize vulnerability. The first night apart was strange. Daniel lay awake listening to the faint sounds of her moving in the next room, the squeak of the bed springs, the shuffle of a page turning. He realized how much of intimacy was built not on words or touch, but on the awareness of another heartbeat in the dark. He texted her, "Good night, Liv." A few minutes later, she replied, "Good night. Don't overthink." He smiled in the dark. It was the closest thing to peace he'd felt in months. Days began to find a rhythm again. Olivia threw herself into work with a new kind of focus, but not the feverish kind that once burned her out. She started therapy alone with Ellen twice a week, writing more, talking less, letting the stillness do its work. At the agency, Mark had transferred to another account, a quiet reshuffling that everyone pretended was logistical. They passed each other in the elevator once. He nodded. She returned the gesture. There was no bitterness, only fatigue. The story had already ended. One evening, after a particularly heavy solo session, Olivia found herself walking home across the bridge instead of taking the train. The air was cool, the city below flickering like a half-forgotten dream. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like running from work, from guilt, from the man who had once been her anchor. When she reached the apartment, Daniel was in the living room with Max, sorting through old photos on his laptop. She paused in the doorway, watching him laugh softly at a picture of their Vermont trip, their hair windblown, faces sunburned, happy. He noticed her and smiled, small, but genuine. "Hey, you okay?" "I think so," she said, surprised to realize it was true. "Therapy? Hard. Necessary." She hesitated, then added, "Ellen asked what I miss most about us. I said I miss the way you used to look at me when I wasn't saying anything. Like you still heard me." He closed the laptop. "I still do." The room filled with quiet again, but it wasn't the sharp kind. This was the kind that held room for possibility. The next Monday, their couple's session unfolded differently. Ellen greeted them with that same calm warmth and asked, "How's the breathing space working?" Olivia said, "It's helping. I'm remembering that I exist outside the version of me who cheated." Daniel nodded. "And I'm learning that forgiveness isn't a single act. It's maintenance." Ellen smiled. "Good. Then let's open a new question. If you were building your marriage from scratch, what would you keep?" They looked at each other, the question stretching between them like a rope bridge. Olivia spoke first. "The friendship, the humor, the way he never makes a room feel unsafe." Daniel's voice followed steady. "Her curiosity, her drive, the way she challenges the world, and sometimes me." Ellen nodded. "And what would you leave behind?" This time they both answered together. The pretending. For the first time, they laughed, not a sharp or hollow sound, but one with weight and relief. That night, back home, Daniel knocked lightly on the spare room door. "You awake?" "Yeah." He opened it a crack. Olivia was sitting cross-legged on the bed, surrounded by open notebooks and candlelight. She looked up, hair tied loosely, face soft from exhaustion, and something gentler. "I was thinking," he said. "We have 2 rooms now. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe every marriage needs doors, not walls." She tilted her head. "Doors can close." "Yeah," he said, "but they can also open." She smiled at that. The first real smile he'd seen in weeks. "Come in then," she said quietly. He did. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful, as if stepping onto holy ground. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. The distance was finally honest, finally chosen. Through the open window, the city hummed its endless rhythm. Somewhere, a siren wailed. Somewhere else, laughter spilled from a rooftop bar. Life went on, imperfect and alive. Daniel looked around the small room, her new sanctuary, her rediscovery, and whispered, "We'll find our way through this, door by door." Olivia nodded, "As long as we keep them unlocked." And in that small, tender agreement, something unspoken shifted again, not the old love resurrected, but a new one, quieter, humbler, beginning to breathe. Autumn slipped into Brooklyn without ceremony. The air sharpened. Mornings came later, quieter. The city's colors began to fade into the soft golds and rust of endings. And maybe, Daniel thought, that was what healing really looked like. Not sudden brightness, but a slow turning toward light after a long stretch of gray. It had been almost 2 months since Olivia moved into the spare room. 2 months of therapy, hard conversations, and small, deliberate peace treaties. The apartment felt different now, more open, less curated, as if the silence itself had learned to breathe between them instead of suffocating them. That morning, Olivia was sitting at the kitchen table, barefoot, typing an email to her team. Her once constant restlessness had quieted into a steady hum. Daniel leaned against the counter, sipping coffee, watching her. She looked up, caught his gaze, and smiled shyly, as though they were still learning how to greet each other after years of knowing and unknowing. "Big day?" he asked. She nodded. "Presentation to the board, but I'm not nervous, not like before." "That's new." She laughed softly. "Yeah, turns out sleeping more than 4 hours a night helps." He smiled, then hesitated. "You seem lighter." "I think I stopped trying to prove something," she said. "To them, to you, To myself. She paused, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. Do you ever feel like we both kept score without realizing it? All the time, he admitted. Every kindness, every mistake, everything became evidence. Dr. Sykes called it transactional love, she said. We gave only to make sure the other person stayed. He nodded slowly. And now? Now, she said, meeting his eyes, I just want to give because it's who I am, not because I'm afraid you'll leave. Daniel exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and grief. Then maybe that's where we start. That evening, they met Ellen for what was supposed to be their final scheduled session. The office looked different in the soft amber light of early evening, less like a confessional, more like a living room. Ellen poured them both tea, her quiet ritual before every goodbye. You've come far, she said. When we first met, you were speaking from wounds. Now, you're speaking from awareness. Olivia smiled faintly. Awareness hurts too. It does, Ellen agreed. But it's the kind that heals. She looked between them. Tell me, what does forgiveness mean to you now? Daniel thought for a long moment before answering. It's not absolution. It's permission to keep living, even when the story doesn't fit the old shape. Ellen nodded, then turned to Olivia. And for you? Olivia's voice was quiet but steady. It's remembering that love isn't proof of goodness. It's a practice, and I want to keep practicing. Then you already are, Ellen said gently. For the first time, neither of them cried. The hour passed like calm water reflections instead of ruptures. When they left, the sky was a bruised violet, the air cool and sweet. Outside the brownstone, Daniel stopped at the steps. You want to walk a bit? Olivia nodded. They wandered through Carroll Gardens, their shoulders almost touching, but not quite. Streetlights blinked on, one by one, spilling gold across the cracked sidewalks. She said, You remember that trip we planned, the one to Oregon we never took? He nodded. The coast, the vineyards, you kept sending me Airbnb links. I still want to go, she said. Not to escape, to see who we are away from the noise. He glanced at her. You want to go together? She met his eyes. If you'll have me. He smiled, the kind of quiet smile that meant yes, without conditions. Then let's plan it. They walked on in silence, the city humming around them, 1,000 windows glowing with other people's stories. Somewhere nearby, a musician played a cello on a stoop, the sound low and aching. That night, when they got home, Olivia lingered in the hallway. The door to the spare room was still open, light spilling out. She looked at it, then at the room they once shared. Daniel followed her gaze. No rush, he said. We don't have to rename rooms yet. She smiled softly. Maybe not, but I think I'm ready to stop living halfway. He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, Then let's write new terms. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where the first argument had broken them open, and began to write. Not promises, not vows, but truths. We will speak before we assume. We will tell the truth before it curdles. We will make space, but we won't disappear into it. We will remember that love is maintenance, not miracle. When they finished, she folded the paper and slid it into the ceramic dish by the door, the one that had once held the cufflink, the artifact of betrayal. This time, she whispered, something worth keeping. Daniel reached for her hand. This time, we both keep it. They stood there, side by side, the sound of the city dimming beneath them. It wasn't a cinematic reconciliation. There were no grand declarations, no perfect endings, just two people standing in the quiet aftermath, choosing again carefully, consciously, and with open eyes. Outside, the wind moved through the last of the leaves. Inside, their apartment exhaled, as if the walls themselves had been waiting for this breath. And when she finally followed him into their room, closing the door softly behind her, it wasn't the sound of something ending. It was the sound of a beginning learning to be gentle.